The stage lights burned hotter than the August sun, and Elliot Harper felt every bead of sweat trace his spine as he faced the crowd. At 28, he'd never imagined standing here, in the heart of Washington, D.C., with a microphone trembling in his hand and a truth heavier than the world on his shoulders. 10 years ago, his family had buried his identity to protect their legacy. Now, he was unburying it to claim his own. Elliot's eyes scanned the sea of faces, a mosaic of hope, skepticism, and raw curiosity. The banners waved high, some with his name, others with rainbows, a few with slurs he'd learned to ignore. He adjusted his tie, the same navy one his father had worn during his first Senate campaign, and let the weight of that irony ground him. "I'm not here to be my father's shadow," he began, his voice steady but laced with fire. "I'm here to be the man he tried to erase." The crowd roared, a sound that vibrated through his bones. To his left, Caleb Ruiz stood quietly, his presence a tether in the storm. Caleb, with his warm brown eyes and unshakable calm, had been the one to pull Elliot from the wreckage of his past. They'd met 2 years ago in a cramped community center in Baltimore, where Caleb taught art to kids who'd seen too much. One glance, one shared laugh over a spilled coffee, and Elliot knew he'd found something worth fighting for. But fighting came with a cost. Elliot's father, Senator Edward Harper, had built a career on family values and conservative charm, a facade that crumbled when Elliot came out at 16. The solution was swift: a private boarding school, a media blackout, and a family narrative that wrote him out as the troubled son. For years, Elliot complied, hiding in the margins of his own life, until the day his father announced his retirement, and the open Senate seat that came with it. "I'm running," Elliot had told Caleb that night, pacing their tiny apartment. Caleb had paused, paint smudged on his cheek, and asked, "For you? Or for them?" The question haunted Elliot still. Was this campaign about proving his worth, or dismantling the lies his family had spun? Maybe both. The rally was his first public appearance since declaring his candidacy, and the stakes couldn't be higher. His father's old allies, powerful, connected, and vicious, had already started whispering. Too young, they said. Too reckless. And the unspoken jab, too gay. Elliot knew they'd dig up every secret, every moment he'd spent rebuilding himself. But he wasn't the scared teenager anymore, banished to a dormitory with his heart in pieces. As he spoke, his voice grew stronger, weaving his story into a call for change. He talked about the kids like him, silenced by shame, about families fractured by fear, about a country that deserved leaders who lived their truth, not just preached it. The crowd hung on every word, but Elliot's eyes kept finding Caleb's. This was their fight, too, a love they'd carved out against the odds, now thrust into the spotlight. Behind the stage, Elliot's sister, Claire, watched with a tight jaw. At 32, she was her father's daughter, polished, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal to the Harper name. She'd begged Elliot not to run, warning him of the media frenzy, the family's wrath. "You're tearing us apart," she'd said. But Elliot saw it differently. He was tearing down the walls that had kept him caged. As the rally ended, a reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "Mr. Harper, how do you respond to claims that your candidacy is a stunt to undermine your father's legacy?" Elliot's pulse spiked, but Caleb's hand brushed his, a fleeting anchor. "My father's legacy is his to answer for," Elliot said, meeting the reporter's gaze. "I'm here to build something new." The crowd erupted again, but Elliot felt the weight of eyes beyond them. His father's, his party's, a nation's. This was only the beginning, and the road ahead was a minefield. He glanced at Caleb, who gave him a small, steady nod. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Elliot's campaign headquarters was a rented storefront in downtown D.C., its windows plastered with posters and its air thick with coffee and ambition. By week 2, the team was a patchwork of idealists. Priya, a sharp-tongued strategist who'd worked on underdog campaigns. Marcus, a former journalist turned speechwriter. And Lena, a tech whiz who monitored the online firestorm. They were outnumbered, underfunded, and, in Priya's words, insanely optimistic. Elliot spent his days shaking hands, dodging cameras, and refining his message. Every speech was a tightrope walk, too progressive, and he'd alienate moderates, too cautious, and he'd lose the fire that drew people to him. Caleb, meanwhile, was his quiet compass. He'd slip into the office after teaching, bringing sketches for campaign art or just a steady hand to hold during late-night strategy sessions. But the past wasn't done with them. A week before the first debate, an old photo surfaced. Elliot at 17, kissing a boy at a school dance. The caption, from an anonymous X account, read, "Is this who you want in the Senate?" The post spread like wildfire, and by morning, it was on every news outlet. Elliot stared at the grainy image, his teenage self frozen in a moment of joy he'd been punished for. His stomach churned, but Caleb's voice cut through the haze. "They want you to hide again. Don't." The team scrambled. Priya pushed for a bold response. Marcus drafted a statement, and Lena tracked the post's origins. Elliot, though, felt the old shame creeping in, the fear that he'd never be enough. He locked himself in the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face, until Caleb knocked softly. "You're not that kid anymore," Caleb said through the door. "You're the man who's going to change things." Elliot emerged, resolve hardened. They released a video that night. Elliot, unscripted, in front of a plain wall. "I was 17 in that photo," he said, voice raw. "I was in love, and I was told it was wrong. I'm running for everyone who's ever been told their love doesn't belong." The video went viral, and donations poured in. But so did the threats. Claire called that night, her voice tight. "You're dragging us through the mud, Elliot." Dad's furious. Elliot gripped the phone, picturing his father's cold stare. "He made his choice, Claire. So have I." She hung up, and Elliot wondered if he'd lost her for good. The debate loomed, and Elliot knew it would be a crucible. His opponent, Richard Vaughn, was a seasoned politician with a silver tongue and a knack for dodging scandals. Vaughn's campaign had stayed quiet on the photo, but Elliot wasn't naive. He knew the knives were out. As he prepared, Caleb sat across from him, reading lines, challenging his answers, and reminding him why this mattered. The night of the debate, the auditorium buzzed with tension. Vaughn opened with polished talking points, but Elliot came out swinging. He spoke of equity, of truth, of a Senate that served people, not power. When Vaughn took a veiled jab, some candidates prioritized personal agendas over public good. Elliot didn't flinch. "My agenda," he said, "is to make sure no one has to hide who they are to be seen as human." The crowd erupted, but Vaughn's smile was a blade. As Elliot stepped off the stage, Caleb pulled him into a hug, whispering, "You were unstoppable." But Elliot knew the real fight was just beginning. The fallout from the debate was immediate. X posts exploded, some calling Elliot a hero, others a disgrace. His team worked around the clock, countering smears while pushing his platform: healthcare reform, education equity, and protections for marginalized communities. But the personal attacks stung most. An op-ed in a major outlet, pinned by an anonymous family friend, claimed Elliot was unstable and unfit for office. The words echoed his father's voice from a decade ago, when Edward had looked at him and said, "You're not who we raised you to be." Elliot carried that wound quietly, but Caleb saw it. One night, as they sat on their apartment's fire escape, Caleb handed him a sketch, a portrait of Elliot, mid-speech, eyes alight with purpose. "This is who you are," Caleb said. "Not their lies." Elliot traced the lines of the drawing, his throat tight. "What if I'm not enough?" he whispered. Caleb's hand found his. "You're enough for me. And for them." He nodded toward the city lights, a reminder of the people rooting for them. The campaign gained momentum, but so did the opposition. Vaughn's team dug deeper, leaking emails from Elliot's college years, private messages where he'd vented about his family's rejection. The headlines screamed betrayal, but Elliot refused to apologize. At a town hall in Richmond, he faced a hostile question: "How can we trust you when you've turned on your own family?" Elliot paused, then spoke from the heart. "My family turned on me first. Trust me, because I know what it's like to fight for a place at the table." The room went silent, then burst into applause. A woman in the back, her eyes wet, approached him after. "My son's gay," she said. "He's 16. Thank you for giving him hope." Elliot hugged her, his own eyes burning. Moments like these kept him going, but the pressure was relentless. Claire showed up unannounced at headquarters one morning, her face a mask of control. "Dad wants to meet," she said. Elliot's stomach dropped. Edward Harper hadn't spoken to him in years, not since the night he'd packed Elliot off to boarding school. "Why now?" Elliot asked. Claire's lips thinned. "He thinks you're ruining his legacy. He wants you to drop out." The meeting was set for a private club in Georgetown, a place that reeked of old money and older secrets. Elliot arrived alone, his father's silhouette unmistakable in the dim light. Edward was grayer now, but his presence still filled the room. "You're making a mistake," Edward said, not looking up from his whiskey. "This isn't your world, Elliot. You don't belong here." Elliot's hands clenched. "I belong wherever I choose to stand." Edward's eyes flicked up, cold and assessing. "You're a liability. Always have been." The words cut, but Elliot held his ground. "I'm not your liability anymore. I'm my own man." He walked out, heart pounding, knowing he'd just burned a bridge he could never rebuild. Back at the apartment, Caleb was waiting. Elliot collapsed into his arms, the weight of the day spilling out. "He'll never see me," Elliot said, voice breaking. Caleb held him tighter. "Then make the world see you." The campaign pushed on. Priya secured a major endorsement from a progressive senator, and Marcus crafted a speech that turned the leaked emails into a rallying cry. But the real game-changer came from Lena, who traced the op-ed to a consultant tied to Vaughn's campaign. The revelation hit the news, shifting the narrative. Suddenly, Elliot wasn't just a candidate. He was a fighter exposing corruption. At a rally in Philadelphia, Elliot felt the tide turning. The crowd was bigger now, their energy electric. He spoke of love, not as a weakness, but as a strength. He spoke of Caleb, who stood at the edge of the stage, sketching the scene. "This is for everyone who's been told they don't belong," Elliot said. "We belong, and we're not going anywhere." But the victory was short-lived. That night, a brick crashed through the headquarters window, wrapped in a note. "Faggots don't win." Elliot stared at the shattered glass, fear and fury warring inside him. Caleb's hand found his, steady as ever. "We're stronger than this," Caleb said. Elliot nodded, but the weight of the fight felt heavier than ever. The brick was only the beginning. Threats flooded Elliot's inbox, some anonymous, others brazenly signed. Protesters picketed outside headquarters, their signs vicious but their numbers small. Priya called it noise, but to Elliot, it was a reminder of the world he was up against. He doubled down, hitting the campaign trail harder, from small-town diners to urban community centers. Everywhere he went, he met people like him. Queer, marginalized, hungry for change. Their stories fueled him, but they also broke his heart. Caleb became his shadow, insisting on being at every event. "I'm not letting you face this alone," he said, his voice firm. Elliot didn't argue. He needed Caleb's strength more than he'd admit. But the constant scrutiny was wearing them both down. Paparazzi caught them holding hands outside a coffee shop, and the photo sparked a new wave of headlines. "Harper's boyfriend, asset or liability?" one read. Caleb laughed it off, but Elliot saw the strain in his eyes. At a fundraiser in Boston, a donor pulled Elliot aside. "You're inspiring," the man said, "but tone down the gay stuff. You'll scare off the moderates." Elliot bristled. "The gay stuff is my life," he said. "If they can't handle it, they're not my voters." The donor walked away, and Priya groaned. "You just lost us 50 grand. But Elliot didn't care. He wasn't here to play it safe. The campaign's momentum grew, but so did the attacks. Vaughn's team released an ad that didn't mention Elliot's name, but didn't have to. Images of pride flags and traditional family rhetoric made the point clear. Elliot's team countered with their own ad, a montage of his rallies, his speeches, and a quiet moment of him and Caleb laughing together. "This is what courage looks like," the voiceover said. It pulled well, but Elliot knew it wouldn't sway everyone. Claire reached out again, this time by text. "Dad's sick. He wants to see you." Elliot stared at the message, torn. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to let his father stew in the consequences of his choices. But another part, the part that still remembered bedtime stories and fishing trips, couldn't let go. Against Caleb's advice, he agreed to meet. The hospital room was sterile, Edward's face pale against the pillows. "You're still running," Edward said, his voice weak but sharp. I thought you'd have quit by now. Elliot's jaw tightened. I'm not doing this for you. Edward's eyes narrowed. You think you're a hero? You're a fool. This world will chew you up. Elliot leaned closer. Then I'll go down fighting, not hiding. He left the hospital shaken but resolute. Caleb was waiting outside, his expression a mix of worry and pride. You okay? He asked. Elliot nodded, but the truth was murkier. His father's words lingered, a poison he couldn't quite shake. The campaign pushed into its final month. Polls showed Elliot gaining ground, but Vaughn still led. The team planned a final push, a series of rallies across Virginia, culminating in a televised town hall. But the night before the first rally, Lena burst into the office, her face pale. They've got something big, she said. I don't know what, but it's coming. Elliot's stomach sank. He'd always known his family had secrets, his father's affairs, his mother's drinking. The deal struck in smoke-filled rooms. But he'd never expected them to turn on him like this. That night, he and Caleb stayed up, combing through old emails, old memories, anything that could be weaponized. Whatever it is, Caleb said, we'll face it together. Elliot kissed him, grateful for the anchor in the storm. The next morning, the bomb dropped. A tabloid published a story claiming Elliot had been paid to stay silent about his father's corruption, a deal brokered when he was 18, after he'd threatened to go public with his story. The evidence was flimsy, but the damage was real. Donors pulled back, and the polls tightened. Elliot stood in the wreckage of his campaign, wondering if he'd been naive to think he could win. The tabloid story hit like a hurricane. By noon, every major outlet had picked it up, and Elliot's phone buzzed with notifications he didn't dare read. Priya called an emergency meeting, her voice sharp. We need a response now? Deny it, deflect it, something. But Elliot wasn't sure what to say. The story wasn't entirely false. He'd been offered money to stay quiet, a deal his mother had pushed him to take. He'd refused, but the paper trail existed, and someone had twisted it into a lie. Caleb sat beside him, his hand a steady weight on Elliot's knee. Tell the truth, he said. All of it. Elliot hesitated. The truth meant exposing his family's ugliest secrets, his father's bribes, his mother's manipulation, the years of silence he'd endured. But Caleb's eyes were unwavering. You've got nothing to hide anymore. Elliot took the stage at a press conference that evening, the cameras blinding. 10 years ago, he began, my family offered me money to disappear. Not because I was a liability, but because I was gay. I said no. I've been saying no ever since. He laid it all bare. His father's corruption, his mother's complicity, the boarding school that was more prison than education. The room was silent, the reporters scribbling furiously. I'm not here to tear my family down, he finished. I'm here to build a future where no one has to hide. The response was electric. X lit up with support, hashtags like Elliot Speaks trending within hours. But the backlash was fierce too. His father's allies called him a traitor, and Claire left a voicemail that was just one word. Why? Elliot didn't call her back. He couldn't afford to look back now. The campaign roared back to life. Donations surged, and volunteers flooded the office. Lena traced the tabloid story to a consultant linked to Vaughn, and Marcus turned it into a blistering speech about truth versus power. At a rally in Norfolk, Elliot felt the crowd's energy like a heartbeat. He spoke of love, of resilience, of a world where no one had to choose between their identity and their dreams. Caleb stood at the edge, sketching, his smile a quiet promise. But the threats didn't stop. A slashed tire on their car, hate mail slipped under their door. Caleb started checking the locks twice, his usual calm fraying. One night, as they lay in bed, he admitted, I'm scared, Elliot. Not for me, for you. Elliot pulled him close. I'm scared too, but we're doing this. The televised town hall was their last chance to sway undecided voters. Vaughn came prepared, his smile polished and his attack subtle. He questioned Elliot's experience, his stability, his ability to represent all Virginians. Elliot countered with passion, sharing stories from the campaign trail. Parents who'd lost children to hate, workers struggling to survive, queer kids who saw him as proof they could dream big. When Vaughn tried to pivot to family values, Elliot cut him off. My family tried to erase me. My values are about making sure no one else feels that pain. The audience roared. and even the moderators looked stunned. Vaughn's smile faltered, and Elliot felt a spark of hope. After the town hall, the polls shifted. Elliot was neck and neck with Vaughn. The team celebrated, but Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. It arrived 2 days later. A leaked audio, grainy but unmistakable. Edward Harper, years ago, discussing how to handle Elliot's coming out. "He's a problem," Edward said. "We'll send him away, keep him quiet." The voice of Elliot's mother chimed in. "He'll thank us later." The audio spread faster than the photo, the emails, the tabloid story. It was a gut punch, but it was also a gift. The public saw the truth. Elliot hadn't betrayed his family. They'd betrayed him. He took the stage in Richmond the next day, his voice raw but resolute. "This isn't about my pain," he said. "It's about the pain of everyone who's been told they're not enough. We're enough, and we're going to win." The crowd chanted his name, and for the first time, Elliot believed they might. Election day was a blur of adrenaline and dread. Elliot woke before dawn, Caleb's arm draped over him, the quiet of their apartment a brief refuge. They voted together at a local precinct, cameras flashing as they stepped out, hands clasped. The image went viral, a symbol of defiance, of love in the face of hate. But Elliot couldn't shake the fear that it wouldn't be enough. The campaign's final hours were chaos. Volunteers canvassed neighborhoods, phones rang off the hook, and Priya barked orders like a general. Elliot hit every polling station he could, shaking hands, thanking supporters, and dodging reporters' questions about the leaked audio. Vaughn's campaign had gone silent, a bad sign. They were planning something, Elliot was sure. By evening, the team gathered at headquarters to watch the results. The room was packed, Marcus chewing his nails, Lena refreshing her laptop, Priya pacing with a glass of wine. Caleb sat beside Elliot, his sketchbook open but untouched. As the first returns came in, Vaughn took an early lead. Elliot's stomach knotted, but Caleb squeezed his hand. "We're not done yet." The numbers tightened as the night wore on. Rural counties went to Vaughn, but urban centers swung hard for Elliot. Social media buzzed with support, young voters turning out in droves. A news anchor called it a generational shift, and Elliot felt the weight of that truth. He wasn't just fighting for a seat, he was fighting for a future. At midnight, Claire appeared at the door. Elliot froze, unsure what to expect. She looked exhausted, her eyes red. "I listened to the audio," she said. "I didn't know how bad it was." Elliot waited, braced for another plea to quit. Instead, she stepped closer. "I'm sorry, Elliot. I should have stood up for you." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. They hugged, tentative but real, and Caleb's quiet smile felt like a victory of its own. By 2 a.m., the race was too close to call. Elliot took the stage to address the crowd, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Win or lose," he said, "we've shown the world what's possible. We've shown that love is stronger than fear." The room erupted, and Caleb's eyes shone with pride. The final count came at 4 a.m. Elliot won by a razor-thin margin, less than 1,000 votes. The room exploded in cheers, confetti raining down. Caleb pulled him into a kiss, the cameras be damned, and for a moment, the world was just them. But the victory was bittersweet. Elliot knew the Senate would be a battleground, his father's allies waiting to pounce. The next morning, headlines called it historic. Virginia elects openly gay senator. Elliot read them with a mix of pride and disbelief. Caleb, ever the artist, was already sketching their next chapter, a portrait of them on the Capitol steps, hand in hand. "This is just the beginning," he said. Elliot nodded, the weight of the fight settling into something new, purpose. But the past wasn't done. A week later, Edward called. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice frail but venomous. "You'll never last." Elliot didn't flinch. "I don't need to last, Dad. I just need to start." He hung up, and for the first time, he felt free. The Senate was a different beast. Elliot's first day in the Capitol was a whirlwind of oaths, handshakes, and sidelong glances. He was the youngest senator, the first openly gay one from Virginia, and every move he made was scrutinized. His office was small, tucked in a corner of the Hart building, but it felt like a fortress. Caleb's sketches hung on the walls, a reminder of why he was here. His first bill was a long shot, legislation to protect queer youth from conversion therapy. He knew it would face resistance, but he'd promised his voters he'd fight. At his first committee meeting, he faced Vaughn's allies, their smiles polite, but their eyes cold. Ambitious, one said, the word dripping with condescension. Elliot didn't back down. It's necessary, he countered, and pushed forward. Outside work, he and Caleb carved out moments of normalcy. They'd walk the National Mall at dusk, stealing quiet conversations amidst the chaos. But the threats hadn't stopped. Anonymous letters arrived at the office, some with slurs, others with vague promises of consequences. Elliot reported them, but the Capitol Police could only do so much. Caleb started carrying pepper spray, his sketches darker, more jagged. One night, over takeout in their new DC apartment, Caleb admitted, "I didn't know it would be this hard." Elliot set down his chopsticks, guilt twisting in his chest. "You can walk away," he said, though the words hurt. Caleb shook his head. "I'm not going anywhere. This is our fight." The bill gained traction, thanks to a coalition of progressive senators and grassroots pressure. Elliot spent late nights drafting amendments, meeting with activists, and countering objections. At a hearing, a senator questioned whether the bill promoted homosexuality. Elliot's response was measured but fierce. "It promotes survival. It promotes the right to exist." The vote was close, but the bill passed committee, a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Elliot called Caleb from the Capitol steps, his voice shaking with relief. "We did it," he said. Caleb laughed, the sound a balm. "You did it." But the Senate floor was another battle. Opponents rallied, citing religious freedom and parental rights. Elliot worked tirelessly, lobbying colleagues, sharing stories from his own life. At a crucial moment, a moderate senator, someone Elliot had written off, approached him. "My niece is trans," she said quietly. "I'm voting with you." It was enough to tip the scales. The night of the final vote, Elliot sat in the gallery, Caleb beside him. When the bill passed, by a single vote, the chamber erupted in a mix of cheers and jeers. Caleb squeezed his hand, tears in his eyes. "You're changing lives," he whispered. Elliot felt the weight of it, the kids who'd write to him, the parents who'd thank him, the future he was helping build. A year into his term, Elliot stood at a podium in Richmond, addressing a crowd of activists, families, and survivors. The bill had become law, a beacon for queer youth across the country. He spoke of resilience, of love, of a world where no one had to hide. Caleb stood at the edge, sketching as always, his presence a quiet strength. But the fight wasn't over. Elliot's family remained distant. Claire reached out occasionally, but Edward never did. The Senate was still a battleground, with new bills and new opponents. And the threats, though fewer, never fully stopped. Yet Elliot felt grounded, not by victory, but by purpose. That night, in their apartment, Caleb showed him a new sketch, a portrait of them, older, standing on the Capitol steps, surrounded by a crowd of faces they'd helped. "This is our legacy," Caleb said. Elliot kissed him, the weight of the past lighter than ever. They'd faced the world's worst and come out stronger. Elliot's story wasn't just his anymore. It was the kid in rural Virginia, coming out to their parents. The teacher in Baltimore, finding courage to be themselves. The senator in D.C., proving that love could change laws. He'd been hidden once, but now he was seen, not just by the world, but by himself. As they stood on their balcony, the city lights stretching before them, Elliot took Caleb's hand. "We did it," he said, echoing that night on the campaign trail. Caleb smiled, his eyes bright. "We're just getting started."